Hello. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. It's Luke here again from Nuaware. I've done a few of these now. Our interview with the CTO series. Lucky enough today to have not just the CTO, but a COO on the Zoom with me. COVID series continues. These guys are joining me from one of our interesting new partners, a company called Humanitec, who really we feel are doing some really interesting things that should be applicable for practically everyone that we deal with in this world of containers and DevOps and cloud native, really. So we thought we'd get the guys on an interview and hear about it from them. So I'll stop sharing this and just say hi to Chris and Christoph. Do you guys want to just do a quick intro of yourselves, or do you want to just dive in onto straight away? Where's Humanitec from, and you can cover that as part of the conversation.
Let's cover this as part of the discussion.
Cool. All right. So I guess first question, Humanitec. Why do you guys exist? What has led you to this point?
Well, we all have the same experience. We all have experience in enterprise software development, but we come at it from different angles. We looked at enterprise software development and all came up with the same conclusion. In far too many cases, the developer experience in those larger teams is not where it should be, and not where it could be. There's ways too many developers waiting for stuff or fiddling around with configuration instead of solving this world's problems or the customer's problems. And that's what brought us together. And we want to do something about that.
Okay, fantastic. So just to go into a little bit more depth on that then. So who are you guys? Who are you to say that you know things about this area? What's your expertise, and how can you help with people in this area?
Sure. We are a very engineering-focused team based in Berlin, and we are all driven by this idea to boost developer experience for the many enterprise teams out there. If you look at our founding and management team, we have our CEO, Casper, with more than 10 years of experience in various startups, from door-to-door campaigning to NGO software, very broad focus. And he has this very clear vision that engineers should focus on solving this world's problems instead of wasting time with everyday tasks and configurations. Then we have Chris, who is also here today. Chris is an engineer by training, and he used to work for Google for 3.5 years as a product manager on one of their internal developer platforms. And the idea here is to bring this experience and the developer experience that you have within Google to more teams out there. And then we have me, Christoph. I'm COO, have an engineering background, worked 5 years for McKinsey and company, saw a lot of large enterprise software development teams and the pain they went through, and saw that developers are just not happy, but they should be, and they should just dive into the customer's problems. And that's what brought me to co-found Humanitec.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. So, bringing the internal developer experience of Google to the masses sounds amazing. Would you mind just digging into that in a little bit more depth? What do you mean that experience, and what does it look like a little bit inside Google?
Yeah, sure. So, we can all say that DevOps and continuous delivery is the new way, or the new accepted way of building software, and especially at the big tech companies like Google and like Airbnb, Spotify, and so on. We generally see that building this kind of cloud native software is complex, especially if you're introducing DevOps principles and continuous delivery. You've got new tooling and new processes. If you look at the large tech companies, they tend to build internal developer platforms. So this is something to improve their developer experience, so that they can developers can focus on solving their problems and not focus on stuff like trying to deploy their code or spin up a database or maybe create a new environment to test their software in. So what we're trying to do at Humanitec is take that experience, those internal developer platforms, and provide it for companies that don't have the time and resources to set up their own internal developer platform. So that leads us to Humanitec, which is your out-of-the-box internal developer platform. So we want something that works not with these in-house tech of the likes of Google or Spotify, but something that works with your standard main cloud providers, so Google, Azure, AWS, and across all of the standard technologies and managed services that most companies are building their technology stacks on.
Okay, fantastic. Obviously, we've been around in this space for a little while, and this idea of automating your DevOps pipeline or extending your CI/CD we've heard it sometimes in the past from other vendors. How are you guys different to, say, existing CI/CD tools which are out there at the moment?
Sure. So I think our main differentiation is that we're not just looking at the automating, getting your code from development into production as quickly as possible. We think that's just one part of it. And actually, the bigger part is the organizational transformation that you need when adopting DevOps and continuous delivery. So, for example, you have to make sure that your software is organized around the fact that you can deploy individual bits and you can run things through, but at the same time, your teams need to be organized. And that means that you have your developers on one side who are trying to fit things into New World, and then you brought a DevOps team who are bringing in new practices and new tools. This generally increases the complexity of what's going on. So what we're trying to do at Humanitec is not to just give you another tool you need to learn, but we're trying to give you something that structures what you have to do so that everyone can achieve what they need to do. That is deploy, that is spin up environments, that's provision technology, without having to be experts in things like Terraform or fiddling around with Helm charts or any of the other things you need to do in order to get your day-to-day job done. So it's really about compartmentalizing that complexity so that developers can focus on developing and the DevOps team can focus on making sure the infrastructure is all up and running and the processes are running smoothly without them becoming a bottleneck.
Sure. Okay, makes sense. Now, typically inside our customers, we see teams with varying levels of maturity when it comes to things like DevOps and containerization and that sort of stuff. So let's say within a typical enterprise, you've got multiple teams, hundreds of developers. Is this a wholesale move? Do we need to say, right, we're moving everything into Humanitec for everything to get the benefit out of this? How do typically organizations start or adopt, or how can they get going with something like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. In many cases, it's just not practical to enforce something like an internal developer platform across all your teams in one step. That's not what anybody would advise, I guess, nowadays, also from a consulting experience. And since Humanitec is fairly flexible and can be easily adopted depending on the use case of the specific team, we developed a very standardized approach on how to get started. And it's very straightforward. We typically start with an initial workshop where we bring together some of the experts, dive into the architecture, really sketch out how Humanitec can fit in. From there, we pick a pilot, any project that's not super crazy complicated, so that it can be dealt with in a decent amount of time. And then we run this pilot together with the customer. Typically takes 2 to 3 days. A lot of teams also manage this in one day if the use case is not too complex. This gives the customer a good understanding of how Humanitec works, what it does. And then typically teams go off and bring in their own application, supported by implementation experts on our side. This takes whatever 2 weeks to 6 weeks to get familiar with it. And then after that, we're talking about the rollout step by step. We're there to cover, obviously, with an SLA and the support that's needed to get this going. But it's really this start small and then grow it into your existing setup approach.
Okay, well, that makes sense. And just as a devil's advocate kind of question then, so Chris, you mentioned that the whole idea of this is that the whole of the development team don't need to be experts in all of the different tools. Who is building and configuring and maintaining Humanitec itself?
All right, so it's a good question. So at Humanitec, we like to say that the platform is used by developers and administered by DevOps. So just to kind of unpack that a bit, your DevOps engineers will be doing things like configuring which database instance you're going to be provisioning databases in for dev environments or staging environments or production environments, and actually structuring those environments. So what clusters, what AWS accounts you're going to run your EK instance in, and so on. And on the developer side, they can just focus on the coding. So they'll say things like, oh, I need to spin up a new dev environment. And when I deploy my code, I know it's going to land in the right Kubernetes cluster. I know that it's going to be have a database provisioned from the right RDS instance, and I can just get going straight away. So from a kind of perspective of who's managing what, the DevOps team are the kind of configuration managers, if you will, but they're also getting involved in actually getting everything up and running. And the developers are people who are using the platform kind of on a daily basis to just get their work done.
Okay, all right, makes sense. And sounds like probably a pretty straightforward answer to this one, but if Humanitec is the way that the people are interfacing with their infrastructure, I assume it's not the only way they can interface with their infrastructure. They're not locked in only to using Humanitec. What happens if some teams want to move their application away from the platform? How does it work?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. We do hear this quite a bit. The good thing here is, as you said, we don't try to lock you in. Everything that is managed by Humanitec can be exported in industry standard formats. So let's take a deployment, for example. You can export the Kubernetes manifest, and then you can run this deployment in the same infrastructure that you run it with Humanitec. You can run it yourself. But obviously, it's more difficult, right? I mean, if you know React and React eject, that's similar. Yeah, you can push React eject once. You can eject from Humanitec, but then you are out there on your own, and you have to fiddle around with this configuration yourself. But there's definitely a way out.
Right. Okay. I assume that would be the case, but you need to ask that question. It's not always been historically how software companies have operated going back, but it's good to hear. One more of a sort of enterprisey question we get quite a lot from our customers is this idea of audit coming into their software delivery processes now. How is this tracked, or is this tracked? How can Humanitec potentially give you visibility into what it is doing or what has been deployed, that sort of stuff?
Sure. So one of the great things about Humanitec is that everything that runs through Humanitec is tracked. So for example, what is deployed, who deployed it, where it's deployed, and so on. But Humanitec actually goes one step further, is that we're tracking things not just on a deployment basis, but also the history of where that came from. So just like you would track your individual container through different environments, you can also track the configuration through environments, which is very, very useful for kind of compliance and auditing, because that means you can also validate that as well as your code having made it through all of these various stages, you can also validate your configuration has been tested in various stages all the way through, giving you a nice kind of round visibility on everything that's going on in your software infrastructure. Cool.
That sounds great. I think that's all the specific questions I have for you guys today. I do appreciate very much you joining me. As mentioned, everybody, Nuaware, we've partnered up with Humanitec and hopefully be working on some projects with them going forward. We will be running some workshops and webinars and things like that, going a little bit more in depth into specifically how the solution can help. So we'll keep you posted. Do check out the website, which Christoph, the website is humanitec.com.io.
.com.
Perfect. Lots of great stuff on there, but thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it, guys.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.